Welcome back to another FPL video. This will be the best free hit team for Blank Gameweek 18, and it's the first free hit video since around Gameweek 13, and there's going to be much more content for Blank Gameweek 18. If this video gets to over 200 likes, there could be the transfer tips, team selection, best wildcard team, and the deadline stream in the next couple of days, and possibly a first draft for UCL Fantasy following the Champions League draw that took place on the Monday morning, the 18th of December. But let's get straight into this video talking about the best 50-man squad on the free hit. In goal, I'd opt for Emi Martinez at home to Sheffield United, and I think a double or triple up in Aston Villa is very viable this week, and long-term Martinez isn't an option I'd really advocate for. I don't trust Aston Villa defensively in the long run, but in games like this at home where Aston Villa are imperious at Villa Park, I definitely fancy them to keep a clean sheet and win the game quite comprehensively. So Emi Martinez is in goal. I think that's a very solid choice, and apart from him, you have some alternatives elsewhere, but even the best goalkeeper options in FPL like David Raya and Alisson are facing each other, and I wouldn't really back anyone for a clean sheet there. Then you look at maybe Fabianski, he's facing Manchester United, and then you've got Dubravka away to Luton Town. He's another possibility, and you could go for him in this team. And speaking of which, I think if you are going to go for a backup goalkeeper, Dubravka is absolutely fine, but there's also Turner or another cheap option. It doesn't really matter because Emi Martinez will play and you won't really need that backup goalkeeper. But if you want a cheap option, Dubravka or Turner will do just fine on your bench. There are plenty of injury doubts this week, especially in terms of the best defenders in the game. Kieran Trippier is one of them after serving his suspension, and Pau Torres is another. Amidst all the commotion of the Brentford-Aston Villa game at the very end, Pau Torres picked up an injury, and Unai Emery said, hopefully it's a small injury, hopefully. And that's all he really said. Apart from that, he also went on to say the big problem today is the red card of Kamara. So we don't have anything definitive on Pau Torres, but it doesn't seem too serious. However, it would not surprise me if he were to miss out in Game Week 18 in order to not aggravate the injury and not take any risk whatsoever, and then have him back for that crucial game against Manchester United the week after. So with Pau Torres, if he is indeed out, you can go for another Aston Villa defender like Alex Moreno or Luca Dean, but the problem is nailing down the player who's going to start there. Luca Dean has been starting most games this season, but he was also suspended for Game Week 17. Alex Moreno came in, scored a goal, and maybe he's going to keep his place. Then you've got Matty Cash on the other side. I don't really trust him, so maybe instead you would go for either Konsa or Diego Carlos, who are the most nailed-on Aston Villa defenders after Pau Torres. So I think any one of those three would be absolutely fine, and I would certainly advocate that double up in the Aston Villa defence this week, but not in the long term. Now, if we go to the other defenders, it will be a bit trickier here, but I would go for Pedro Porro as another option at your disposal. At home to Everton, who have been flying recently after losing to Manchester United and having that 10-point deduction. They've won every single game, and they're climbing that Premier League table, and they're almost certainly going to be safe from relegation. But Tottenham Hotspur have been impressive in recent weeks after a very, very rough patch following the injuries to Maddison, Van der Ven, and many suspensions along the way. But now that key players like Romero are back, Spurs are looking a bit better, and Pedro Porro got 8 points in Game Week 17. He was one of my transfers in for a -4 hit. He accumulated 2 bonus points on top of that clean sheet against Nottingham Forest, and Spurs went down to 10 men yet again. So indiscipline does seem to be an issue in that side, but they can certainly fix that over the coming weeks. Now, next up will be yet another injury doubt who I kind of mentioned before. He's not currently flagged on FPL, but after the Champions League game, Eddie Howe talked about Trippier, and he said he felt something, and as a precaution, he had to come off. And that was in the game against AC Milan, but he did serve a suspension, and that's completely out of the way. He is available now, and I believe he will be in the side, and as a result, he is also in this squad. But let's say he were to miss out, and you want to cover that Newcastle defence and have someone in your starting 11, then I'd also consider Dan Burn, maybe Sven Botman now that he's back. Fabian Schär's a wait and see. He picked up an injury in that win against Fulham. And apart from that, Lascelles could live to fight another day with Fabian Schär potentially being out. But overall, apart from Trippier, I think Dan Burn will be the best next Newcastle defender. So I think that's where I'd go instead. Now, the other two defenders to complete this team will be a bit awkward because you most likely would have to bench one of these options, and that includes Trent Alexander-Arnold, the most informed defender in FPL. He's getting clean sheets galore, bonus points and assists, and this is looking like the trend that we all know from years gone by, and there's a reason why he costs 8.2 million. But he is facing Arsenal. That is going to be a really tough game, and despite the fact that Liverpool would be favourites because it's at Anfield, I still think Arsenal could score in that game. So that's why Trent could be on your bench. And it's completely up to you how you organize it. I'll give you a starting 11 very soon using FPL.team. But in terms of clean sheet chances, I would argue that Trent has the lowest of the 4 defenders covered so far. But the final defender I'm going to go for isn't really going to be the best option on paper, and I still don't trust this team defensively, but I would go for Robinson and potentially some Fulham defensive coverage. Leno is another good option and shout in goal. If you don't go for Emi Martinez in goal, then I think Leno is a very good shout to be your main goalkeeper in Blank Gameweek 18, but Robertson does cover that Fulham defence against Burnley, who have been struggling all season, and he also is a good facilitator and enabler on your bench. I'd rank Robertson at the bottom of this 5, of course, for natural reasons, but Trent Alexander-Arnold is a very difficult one to bench, and I really can't stomach that. So you could always go for an even cheaper defender and then use those funds to upgrade another position in the midfield or the forward line. But let's now move on to those positions. There's still some more conundrums and many more things to discuss, and some key assets in FPL will be left out. Heung-min Son is an ideal pick on the free hit because he can easily deliver a double-digit return. He's done it on multiple occasions this season, and his ceiling is arguably the highest of any player this week, alongside Ollie Watkins, and those two are the main contenders for the captaincy. But for me, Heung-min Son is just a really good pick. Facing Everton, who are in form, we've discussed this, and I think Everton could give them a good game, but Spurs have beaten them quite comprehensively in the last 2 meetings at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, 2-0 and 5-0. Of course, different managers now, different circumstances. I think both teams will score, but Heung-min Son is certainly a very good option, to say the least. And you could even go for that double up in the Spurs attack with Kulusevski or, dare I say, Richarlison. If I had to pick between those two, it would be Kulusevski, and Richarlison is in good goal-scoring form, and he's facing his former club, so there's also added incentive for him there. But for me, Kulusevski is looking more impressive, and he's getting the goals and the assists at the same time. But when we go to the other midfielders, there will be some surprises in here, and I'm going for yet another Fulham player, and that will be Andres Pereira in this instance. But you could also go for a Iwobi or Willian. My favourite is Andres Pereira because of his consistency and his assist threat throughout. He's got 35 chances created so far this season, and I think he could be a very good differential this week. He was a very template option last season when he was 4.5 million. It's a bit different this time round, but he's still a fairly decent pick, and on a free hit, I think he could do very well, to say the least. Now, it was Lucas Paqueta and Kuda stealing the show, but I'd still favour Jarrod Bowen, and in terms of expected points, according to FPL.team and all these algorithms, he is still one of the highest scoring in terms of projected points amongst midfielders with 6. So I would go for Jarrod Bowen against Manchester United, who, to be fair, he doesn't have a great record against them, but I still think Bowen has been so consistent, and he hasn't blanked many times this season. But you have to say, Man United are in good away form, and they're also quite tough to beat on their day. So this could be a bit of a risky pick, and ultimately I think a lot of you will prefer some alternatives like Saka or even Gordon, who does miss out at the moment. I think it's between Bowen and Gordon for a spot in this team. You could also make a case for Andres Pereira dropping out entirely, and I'm still backing Bowen to do well, and I think West Ham would still be the marginal favourites in this game, but you can never rule out Man United, as you saw in that Sunday clash against Liverpool. Now, the other 2 midfielders in this team will be quite simple, and they include Cole Palmer, who got 14 points in Game Week 17, and he was unlucky not to get a second assist because he put it on a plate for Armando Broja, but Palmer was exceptional, and he carried Chelsea after they had a dismal first half against Sheffield United, but they really picked up in the second, and Cole Palmer was instrumental in everything Chelsea did. He's on penalties, he's got great underlying numbers, he is so cheap as well, and that makes him a perfect enabler for your FPL squad. The final player in this team will be a very simple one despite the difficulty of the fixture, and that's Salah. He has a great record against the top 6. He always seems to score against Arsenal at Anfield. There might have been a few games recently where he's gone maybe missing, but he even scored last season and he missed a penalty, but still he finds a way of getting those returns, and I would back him to do well against the Gunners in that top of the table clash. And this midfield 5 is really good on paper, but let me know down in the comment section below. Would you rather go for Kudus or Lucas Paqueta over Jarrod Bowen? Would you even go somewhere else entirely and go for Gordon? Let me know, because it's all hypothetical. In terms of the algorithms, they do favour Bowen with 6 projected points compared to Gordon's 5, but it all depends, and ultimately you can't rely completely on these numbers and you have to make your own decisions. You look at the fixtures, Gordon has the better one on paper, but Newcastle have been quite poor on their travels, and it wouldn't surprise me if that game was 0-0 or as a tight 1-0 win for Newcastle. So in the end, I have gone for this midfield 5 and skipped Gordon for now. If the game was at home at St James's Park, where Gordon hasn't blanked this season, it would be a completely different story entirely. But let's now head over to the free forwards and complete this team. You could go for any budget forward, it doesn't really matter, and we do have funds in the bank to upgrade any position you wish, but I don't think it's necessary to have a fully stacked bench on the free hit. It could be useful if injuries arise. Let's say you really want to go for Pau Torres and he misses out. Having that good player on the bench can certainly compensate for that, and there's a lot of things to consider there. But I would go for Semenyo, and he's absolutely fine to have second or third on your bench. He's an enabler, and that's really all there is to it. He could even get a return, and if he does, so be it. But ultimately, Semenyo or Archer, take your pick. A budget forward is what I'm going for in this free hit setup. Ollie Watkins is a very simple pick. He's arguably the best option, period, in any position in Blank Gameweek 18. There are so many examples of players hauling against Sheffield United, and I think Ollie Watkins will be yet another one added to the list this season at home, where Aston Villa have won every single game at Villa Park, including against the best teams in the league, Manchester City and others. So I think Ollie Watkins certainly has to be in your FPL squad. The last forward I'm going to go to, there's a lot of debate right now in terms of are the points going to be added, are the bonus points going to be removed, and that is Solanke. And at the time of this recording, there is no concrete update. Game Week 17 is still going on, so this game should probably be rescheduled fairly soon, and then Game Week 17 will finally be put to a close. But in the meantime, it all depends on the final decision from the Premier League. If they continue the game from where it left off, then you would argue that Solanke's points will definitely stand, but maybe the bonus points won't be, and then you'll see the final of that game that will determine who gets the bonus points. But if the game is reset from the very beginning, then all the points should be reset, and FPL are still deciding that, it seems. The communication hasn't been great, but then again, the Premier League haven't decided, so it is difficult for FPL to decide what to do without that information. But Solanke is a great option against Nottingham Forest, who have been struggling. They're winless in 7 games now in the Premier League. Steve Cooper is possibly on the verge of being sacked, and Solanke is in great goal scoring form. He scored yet again against Luton Town. Let's see if that goal ends up counting, but he is so consistent this season, and you can't ask for much more for a 6.8 million forward with less than 20% ownership. So that is the team I've gone for. There is no Erling Haaland or Man City players, of course. Same with Brentford, because those two teams are blanking in Blank Gameweek 18, if you aren't aware. And that is the 50-man squad I've gone for. As I mentioned earlier, you can go for Leno in goal. You could also go for some alternatives in the defence, like Konsa or Diego Carlos if Pau Torres is out. You could also go for Dan Burn instead of Trippier. And there's also a few others that maybe I haven't mentioned in this video, and I recommend you leave your suggestions down in the comment section below. In the midfield, there's Anthony Gordon, Bukayo Saka, who still can't be ignored, even Bruno Fernandes, Kudus, Lucas Paqueta. There are so many options all of a sudden. And while many of the players I just mentioned won't be very consistent, you don't need that in terms of a free hit. You just need them to deliver in one game week. Other midfielders include Willian, who I mentioned, Kulusevski, Richarlison, and also Iwobi in the forward line. I'd also consider the likes of Isak or Callum Wilson. Isak's injury isn't too serious, but they didn't play him against Fulham as a precaution, and it could be a case of Isak and Wilson playing together and Gordon being rested. Who knows? But I personally believe Gordon will still continue most games whilst Harvey Barnes is out on the left-hand side. So that is the 50-man squad. Let's now head over to FPL.team, talk about the captaincy, Heung-min Son, Salah or Watkins. Who should we go for? The starting 11, the bench order, all of that is very important, especially if more injury problems arise. You could start either goalkeeper this week, but I would go for Emi Martinez. I would back Aston Villa more for the clean sheet compared to Newcastle. And you also look at Luton Town. They've actually given the best teams in the league a really tough match. You look at how they held Liverpool to a draw. They pushed Arsenal all the way. They also gave Man City some problems. So I don't think it'll be that easy and simple for Newcastle United, especially considering their away form, 16th in the league table on their travels. And if it was at St James's Park, it's a completely different story. And you'd probably see a triple up in the starting 11. Now, the back three will be Pau Torres, and Trippier. If you aren't so sure about Pau Torres or Trippier, given their injury concerns, you can go for those Newcastle and Aston Villa defenders I mentioned, Dan Burn. You could even go for the likes of Livramento potentially, but more importantly, Diego Carlos and Konsa, who are more safe options, and Livramento isn't safe by any stretch of the imagination. I've gone for all 5 midfielders here of Son, Andres Pereira, Bowen, Palmer and Salah, and a front line of Watkins and Solanke, and the bench is Dubravka, Trent, Robinson and Semenyo. And like I mentioned earlier, I would back Everton to score, and as a result, if you're not really too sure about Pedro Porro this week, that's absolutely fine. You could start Trent over him instead, or even Robinson, or any defender of your choice. It could even be a double up in a certain team like Newcastle, but I have already gone for the Aston Villa double up, and that's why it's a bit trickier. In terms of other Aston Villa attackers to really target, I think Leon Bailey in the midfield is a shout, and I mentioned him in the reaction stream as one of my favourite differential midfielders in Blank Gameweek 18, but I have opted for this double up in the Aston Villa defence, and that's why there is no space for him in this squad, but you should still consider him at the very least, and if you want to target the Aston Villa attack, so be it, go for it, and I think Leon Bailey is very good. The only concern with him is the injuries and the limited minutes from time to time, but in terms of the captaincy, I have gone for Ollie Watkins at home to Sheffield United. I think Son is a close second, and Salah is also not far behind despite facing Arsenal, but Salah alone can deliver against absolutely anybody. He can get 13 plus points against Man City, Arsenal or any team in the Premier League. But that is what I've gone for. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Would you go for Gordon over Jarrod Bowen? Would you also go for Trent in the starting 11? There's many things you can iron out, but this free hit team sets a foundation and a template for you, and it's all down to personal preference in terms of what you end up doing. In terms of predicted points, it's at 62.1, and it would be even higher if, for example, I went for Gordon instead of Andres Pereira, and generally speaking, I think Gordon is a far better FPL asset. But you also have to consider context. Fulham were in good form before that Newcastle game, and the red card changed things. You also look at Newcastle on their travels, as I mentioned many times in the last couple of weeks, and all of that plays a part. So it's all down to personal preference in terms of what you end up doing. But overall, I'd be very happy with this free hit team. I'm personally not looking to play it because I don't have any Man City or Brentford players, and I think you should play the free hit if, for example, you have 4 or 5 blanks or maybe injury concerns and suspensions. I think in those sorts of scenarios, a free hit in a blank game week could certainly be viable, but if you don't have that many concerns, maybe only 2 free maximum, I would save it for later in the season for either a double game week, blank game week, or a time where your team looks even worse. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's try to get this video to over 200 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 22,000 subscribers and beyond. We're 60 subscribers away from that milestone, and that is our aim by the end of the year. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the other links in the description below for the Patreon, Championships Discord server, and the FPL League. There's also one for Draft Town, which I'll be using in the team selection video and the deadline stream. I wish you all the best of luck for Blank Gameweek 18 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.